Hi, I'm Dani Lebeaux, and welcome to the first reading of Adam 3:15, written by myself, Dani Lebeaux. This is not a professional recording. I am not a professional audiobook reader. However, I am the author of the book. So, for the foreseeable future, we will be taking intermittent sessions where I read from the book in order and create a playlist at the end so that it functions as an audiobook. Again, Adam 3:15 by Dani Lebeaux. Dedication. To all of those who loved me even at my most unlovable, and to all of those who have caused me pain, as I have struggled, as I have triumphed, as I have found meaning, and I have found myself, for all of the things that make us what we are, I am thankful. Editor's notes. This reprint, as authorized by its original authors, represents the first unabridged edition of Adam 3:15 since its original publication in 2026 PT. Special thanks to Councilwoman Cassandra Reynolds, Olympus Protectorate, Earth Allied Forces, Councilman Dr. Stephen Malcolm, Olympus Protectorate, Earth Allied Forces, and Councilman Adam Godwin, Olympus Protectorate, Earth Allied Forces, and to those loved ones, both past and present, who have played their part in this incredible journey. All documents and recordings curated courtesy of the Council of Historical Preservation, Earth Allied Forces. 01 NEA, New Earth Alliance. For those of you who are unaware, author insert right here, this is not written down. This book does tie into the mainline series, Stealing Fire. That editor's note mostly pertains to that series as a world-building framing device. So, it's out of place if you're reading this alone, but within the rest of the context of the series, that's what it's about. All right, now, jumping in. Preface. The following is a full and complete documentation of my interview sessions with the individual that the media have since dubbed Adam 3:15. My personal notes, as well as accounts of the days following the interviews, have been interspersed after the fact and reformatted with an appropriate placement of the records taken by the auto-dictation of each recorded session, in order to best relay an account of these historic events. Cassandra Reynolds. Quote, I've resolved every night, when I am not imperatively occupied by my duties, to record as nearly as possible in his own words what he has related during the day. If I should be engaged, I will at least make notes. This manuscript will doubtless afford you the greatest pleasure, but to me, who knows him and who hear it from his own lips, with what interest and sympathy shall I read it in some future day? Even now, as I commence my task, his full-toned voice swells in my ears. His lustrous eyes dwell on me with all their melancholy sweetness. I see his thin hand raised in animation, while the lineaments of his face are irradiated by the soul within. Strange and harrowing must be his story. Frightful the storm which embraced the gallant vessel on its course and wrecked it thus. Mary Shelley, The Modern Prometheus. Prologue. It should have come as no surprise that the man in front of me bore little resemblance to anything that I had expected. No matter how objective I might strive to be, anticipation has a way of making the mind wander for most people, and I was no different. However, now at the moment of introduction, I could scarcely see a single feature more monstrous in him than his sheer size. Admittedly, that in itself impressed notably upon me at the reality of his arrival. The buzz at my door had come only moments earlier, after which I had paged him in without a word between us. Normally, I would have peeked at my screen to view the camera feed, but by request I had disabled the system for the night in preparation for my subject's arrival. I had also asked him if I should leave the lights on at the very least, but the offer was declined politely without explanation. So while I heard the freight elevator bringing my soon-to-be subject up through the dark, even from where I sat, I could only imagine my guest navigating the strangely haunting space below. The truth is that I had recently put the first 2 floors up for lease after the previous tenants decided to retire. I was happy for them, naturally. They're a lovely couple, but it was going to be difficult to find anyone to fill the space who could, in my mind, possibly replace the charm they brought into my world. There was just something quaint and cozy about living above an antiques warehouse. Luckily, this nostalgia of my heart meant that the sign reading Joe and Frank's Vintage Surplus still hung above the door by the sidewalk entrance, marking my building most readily evident for those inquiring of directions. Admittedly, it also served as the right type of comforting icebreaker for those seeking anonymity within the boundaries of my profession, and I will miss it when the time comes. That being said, I was alone for the night as the sole occupant of the top floor, with all the privacy in the world in order to conduct my business, a consideration that suited my mysterious subject just fine. Even having been paged in and fully announced just moments earlier, he still knocked at my door before entering, which seemed amusing to me given the circumstance, but I called out for him to come without chuckling to myself. I had watched him duck forward and to one side simply to enter my office, but that was enough to establish at least a baseline of why he might fabricate such claims as he had made in his messages. For safety's sake, as always with these types of things, I would be cautious to approach until I had a clearer impression of the subject himself, especially with my main security measures disabled. If needed, the emergency call button was still active below the corner of my desk, but in all my years here, I've never actually used it. It wasn't that I feared what the man claimed to be. Quite the opposite in this case, I admit. He seemed not only friendly, but polite, courteous, and old-fashioned throughout our correspondence to this point. My hesitance stemmed simply from experience. I knew any claims such as those which he had made typically accompanied some level of mental issue which could either be benign or not. I only wanted to be prepared. So I remained behind my desk as I stood to acknowledge his entrance and greeting, partly hoping that the gentleness and calm projected by this choice would promote comfort and ease for his initial impressions. However, I was also making conscious attempts to accommodate what little I knew that he believed of himself. After all, whether legitimate or legitimately crazy, the last thing I should want was to spook this man, especially now that I saw his size. At this point I could see little else by his silhouette, but I could tell from a distance that he wore a long black coat and an oversized blue-gray scarf whose fabric was worn thin with age. Even after he had made his way inside and gently closed the door behind himself, his details remained obscured over the distance, as the only illumination within the hall outside belonged to the soft glow of the emergency lights nearest the lift, leaving my eyes to adjust once more to the dim of my desk lamp's warm but limited glow within the room, while the blinds hung closed behind me. Perhaps if I'd chosen a smaller office for myself, we might have seen each other better, but I had picked this one for good reasons. Despite my apartment being just down the hall, the fact was, a lot of nights, more than I should rightly admit, I slept here on the sofa, and it was far more common for me to host guests in a professional capacity than for me to invite anyone over for social reasons. Besides all of that, the view was amazing at sunset, as the rear of the building faced due west with no other structures between myself and the city park nearby. I also liked that the space allowed me to frame my old articles in a single line along the wall rather than jumbling them over and under each other around the room. In contrast to all of this, the distance between us, the dim light and so on, the big man's movements were clear. He silently looked my way with a slight gesture of inquiry towards the teapot and glasses which I had prepared upon the room's side table. I nodded without a word, and he also in silence stepped towards them, with nary a rustle of his clothes while I remained seated. I watched him stoop once more to pour himself a glass, and my eyes widened and strained to make out what detail I could of the interaction. The mug itself nearly seemed like a child's plaything in his overly large hands, vanishing as they wrapped around its curve with only one finger able to fit through the handle. Even though I knew the size were standard mugs, not in fact some toy tea set, I imagined much of the world must look like that to him, and it made the whole scene oddly charming somehow. All the while, the silence echoed off the walls as if we stood amongst a field of graves, with every sound or movement of contact being amplified in the stillness. I looked down to my laptop momentarily and listened with no rush to advance the proceedings beyond whatever pace he might choose. I heard 2 cubes of sugar being first dropped and then stirred into his tea, followed by the light clink of the spoon being set down once more, and the low slurp of liquid through his lips, followed by a deep and resonant breath. I knew that he could hear the tapping of keys as I took notes. The camera of my laptop was on during all of this, I might add, facing forward to see him as I did. This, too, was no secret. He expected me to be watching. By contacting me, he had asked for the scrutiny. He knew what his appearance was, and he knew that the story which he was telling would demand skeptical review. But that doesn't mean professionalism takes a back seat. He may have asked for the outside cameras to remain inactive, but it was okay to stare. It was expected to type. It was even expected to record these sessions. But discretion still mattered. So when I looked up from my screen, I did not stop typing. What's funny is that even then, first impression, no view of his face or expressions, no sound of his voice, while he was busy dwarfing all else in the room, dressed in dark and coming to my office after hours to expand on a claim which was as wild an assertion as I'd ever entertained professionally. His gentleness was apparent. I saw a man of great height and broad shoulder, yes, standing with his dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail above a still-shadowed face, drinking quietly from a small cup of tea which was clearly not produced for any person of his size. And I watched as he politely and cautiously walked forward with the same nervous apprehension which I had seen dozens or more times before in interview. I watched his body language and demeanor as he made sure not to stumble on the edge of the rug, and with careful assessment I made each judgment as if my life depended on them. If there were any violent intention within him, it was not visible at present, nor did I feel it might suddenly appear from a lack of restraint or control, but I had interviewed murderers before who held such calm. With each advancing step, this man, this Vitruvian behemoth, only served to illustrate more the meter of a measured individual, both considerate and careful in his ways. His footsteps did not stomp, stumble, or shake the floor beneath us, which I tell you honestly they should have. However, he continued to lean slightly forward as he walked, and I observed what appeared to be a favorance toward one leg over the other. His lean seemed not out of timidity so much as an attempt to bring himself closer to the level of an average height, as if it were through habit more than situational accommodation. However, I have seen the favorance of its movements before as well, and I determined on a very high likelihood that he had overcome some previous injury long ago to the opposite leg. This happens sometimes, where in these instances one never entirely loses the mental inclination to limp once it is healed. This I felt could not verify. Seen by observation, it seemed to be such a case. While the light exposed more of him with each step, I could see now that his features were that of a man somewhere in his mid-30s. His hair was stylishly acquitted, and his clothing tidy, if not a bit timeless. The woolen coat, the scarf, the plain black pants, shirt, and boots, all but vanishing, as shadows. He wore no beard or scruff, and he had a pronounced structure that I myself might even call handsome after an affair. His lips were a bit thin for my personal taste, but yes, I could see this man being the envy of many others and the desire of more than that. However, all of it seemed tailored toward the impossible. No matter how quiet, how clean, or how polite, gray, dark, shadowy, or otherwise, that this man might make himself, there was no way possible that he could ever hide on the street or in a crowd. As he closed the distance between us to set himself into a chair nearer the light, that truth became clear to me. There, in those awaited but revealing seconds, I bore witness to what a stark difference of the man himself, so far beyond his uncommon proportions that description proves difficult even from my original notes. It was something only visible now in the close proximity, but would have been remarkable in any light, and at this distance, even if not any distance, in full illumination. People despise the concept of judgment, especially in reference to journalism, which strives to be unbiased and truthful, but they neglect to realize that judgment is in fact an integral part of this job. To judge attributes, draw conclusions, investigate fully when possible, and report descriptively, among other duties. I'm appropriately expected to observe, note, and inspect anything which may be of relevance to a story's credibility or motivation. And this man's physical appearance was certainly a part of that. So as is the task, I will attempt to describe the subject now as he appeared to me then, complete with perspective and questioning notation as they occurred in the beginning, without omission or exaggeration on my part. For these matters are relevant to every single word that might follow in the story he claimed. To begin beyond what I have already stated, I could make out a faint scar that ran the length of his scalp, only jutting sharply downward above the edge of his right brow. This was dismissible unless you focused directly on him face to face, but not for lack of presence. Surely it was a large scar, but it was not glaring or distracting to his shape or features. Truthfully, I would say with conviction that in relation to his most striking trait, a trait all its own in its uniqueness, the scar was nearer to nothing than it should have been, had it appeared on another. No, this characteristic was much more evident and intriguing all at once. It sparked immediate unease to me, even while it filled my mind racing with questions to what, in fact, it was that I was seeing. And all of this is to say that what it was, what was then, would be described as an entirely strange and alienating quality about his skin itself. I do not mean to defame or demean the medical conditions of any individual, but this was not a matter of some dermatological condition, injury, or disfigurement. Especially in the light of his claims, I tried my best to act unsurprised, to look calmly and easily toward him in a controlled manner, as an outward form of healthy skepticism, rather than shock or fear, which might serve in his mind to premature vindication. But this quality to his skin simply cannot be overstated in the visceral reaction produced by its sight. Perhaps it makes me seem biased, eager to validate, or even bad at my job to say this, but being as alert as ever and believing myself prepared before his actual arrival, I now find myself feeling as if I had just stepped into the fog of a dream while the world had become hazy around me, blurring the lines between reality and the stuff of fevered hallucinations. There was cognitive dissonance forming in real time as I tried to restructure my basic definitions of human psychology in order to proceed. His skin, as I said, that was the thing. It was unnatural and foreign, but not entirely. There was familiarity of a sort. It looked thin, but only in the way you would expect of the elderly, perhaps, or maybe more so a section of plucked poultry, patted dry and stretched like cling film over something larger than its rightful measurements. But no, that wasn't close enough either. Cling film itself? Perhaps layers of it? Elastic wax paper? Or parchment? It was pulled over those measurements, happening to be the face of a handsome and agreeable man. But barring some severe medical malady that I'd never witnessed before, he didn't appear fully human, which for those who familiarize themselves with bad CGI or the uncanny valley may be well aware can produce a shock to the baser part of one's mind as it struggles to either rewrite the definition of what people look like in general terms, or to reject the image for simply looking wrong in the first place. So here he was, in the flesh, real as could be, which made everything else seem a bit less real by proximity, and therefore easier to accept. But about that flesh, all at once appearing both leathery and yet so papery frail that I couldn't quite tell if what I saw was opaque or indeed translucent without staring straight into it. I remember thinking at that point, there's no way to fake this, when I had finally zeroed in on its cause. It had taken me a few seconds in my surprise, but I finally had it. That was it. Yes, his skin was truly translucent. Not entirely transparent, mind you, but clearly see-through in several places, which are abnormal enough on their own. Beyond this, it was tinted with a slight golden hue which seemed to visibly pulsate in measured time. At this point, I must clarify, this was not an added golden hue atop of some red, pink, white, or brown tones as would be expected. This was no issue of melanin abnormality, nor even extreme albinism alone, as one might think at first description. I truly mean that there was no redness to be seen anywhere on him at all. Neither blush of the cheek, nor vein of the eye, not even pink of the lips, but instead only that slight yellowness just beneath the surface, broken with darker hints of greenish black to the lips, gums, and areas surrounding his eyes, which still showed through with the capillary action of that yellow pulsation within, as if I were watching the blood of his veins being pumped just beneath the form of it all. So the texture wasn't the issue after all, but where the skin was concerned, able now to observe that more objectively, I could finally conclude that it was not overly dry nor cracked, nor as I could actually see the measure of its thickness, even thin or overstretched. It was just somehow inhuman, due to something unfathomable in the series of inevitable conclusions. I picked up my own tea and began to stir it. As we silently awaited the third member of our endeavor, my subject looked down toward my seated position across the desk and offered a gentle smile, raising his glass as if in salute. His teeth were as perfect as any I had ever seen, frighteningly white and straight against the outline of his dark lips and yellowed skin, yet the expression seemed practiced and without ease. Could he truly be as unnerved by my presence as I felt by the oddity of his? From what I could see behind his teeth, his mouth was equally devoid of the red and pink hues considered natural to the common man. I couldn't make it out, but his tongue and inner mouth, as best as I could tell, resembled the same dark blackish-green tint of his lips. My heart raced as the reality of my agreement set in. I could no longer deny in the back of my mind that I was beginning to believe who this man claimed that he was, or what this interview would potentially mean to the world, nor to the man sitting across from me. Seeing was believing, and for the first time in my experience of extravagant claims, I wasn't headed towards debunking the latest urban legend or uncovering a hoax. Here he sat, in the confines of my office. And he was real. Nervously, I breathed in deep and leaned back in my chair, returning a smile before glancing at the time on my laptop. I hoped the smile would not give away my apprehension, as his had already shown, or my pure wonder. He should be here shortly, I assured my guest as I looked up for a reaction. There was a slight pause while I curiously awaited his response. "Have you told him anything about who I am?" he asked. I was somewhat broken from my admitted trance at the sound of his words. This was the first time that I had actually heard him speak. Our correspondence having been previously through email alone, I found that his voice, soft and low, brought crisp clarity to the formation of those words. They were evenly and gently paced, with an articulation that seemed as if he had grown up in the American Midwest. There was no accent to speak of, and no slur nor drawl to his pronunciations. Nothing, in fact, to hint at what I had been told to be his foreign origins. He sat in my mind firmly as the consummate nervous gentleman whom I had seen just moments ago stirring his tea from across the room. I imagine now how difficult typing must have been in our earlier contact. I pictured his large fingers meticulously hitting each key with the faintest of touches in order not to press 2 or even 3 letters at once. I could not help but to laugh slightly at myself, partly for the mental image, but also partly in surprise at my own expectations. This thought relaxed me further, and I responded congenially while I slightly rubbed one hand above my brow. Actually, no. Wasn't quite sure how to explain the idea to anyone without being hung up on, to be honest. The doctor seemed quite intent with the promise that you would be able to answer his questions about the sample I sent him. I looked back up and met the subject's gaze, still wearing a genuine smile on my face. "I see. So he believes he will be meeting with another scientist, then?" he asked. His face looked nervous as he leaned forward, shifting uneasily in his chair. I could see him holding his tea now with both hands on his lap. My answer was not intended to sound flippant or insensitive, but I found it falling from my lips before a second thought. Pardon me, questioned if perhaps I was losing my touch. "Well, you are," I said. "A scientist, that is. From what I can tell from our discussions, I think you are probably one of the most uniquely equipped individuals to have first-hand knowledge in this particular field," I continued. His discomfort could be seen clearly as his eyes darted toward the door. I had to put him at ease before he tried to leave. I could not let the story of a lifetime walk out on me over a stupid mistake. "He does know to expect something remarkable, and he's known to be very open-minded. I assume that was part of why you requested him in particular," I chimed while twisting in my chair playfully, hoping that the open display of innocent femininity might somehow convince him of his safety. It's not something that I've used many times before, but knowing the importance of this fact in many cultures, I gambled the chance. He seemed to relax a bit into his seat as he brought his left hand upward towards his face, placed its thumb gently under the crease of his chin. I knew that I had him thinking then, so I continued to speak. "I met him once in Geneva," I added. My last sentence paid off. I watched as my subject's train of thoughts changed. He reached again for his tea as his eyes looked deep at the glass, picking it up slowly. "Geneva," he breathed longingly. It was as if he had drifted to another place, speaking more to himself and under his breath than to me. I took note during this open stare to study of his eyes themselves. They were pale and colorless, reflective of whatever came near to them, watery even in their vastness, shimmering like mirrors of the world. My following comment attempted to draw his mind back to the present, a reminder of why we were meeting this night. "He was attending the genetics conference," I continued. "I was there for a story." I offered further, allowing my words to trail off. A slight but silent laugh escaped from his mouth as he genuinely smiled at last. There was simply the sound of air escaping his lungs before he spoke. "Same hotel, I might guess?" he questioned, with bemusement, but his chuckle was cut short as he turned his head sharply toward the right, the smile dropping from his face. "He's here," he sighed as he turned, entirely facing his back to the door. I watched the giant lean slightly, as if to intentionally hunch forward before placing his hands onto the armrest of the chair where he sat. He prepared to rise to his feet. "Did you leave the door unlocked after paging me in?" he asked nervously. "I did," I told him, as I too stood, finally hearing the familiar sound of the elevator's motions outside. I wondered how he had known. Session 1. Interviewer name, Cassandra Reynolds, journalist for Washington Post newspaper and special columnist for Al Jazeera International. Second interviewer and consultant, Dr. Stephen Malcolm of the Boston College Institute for Scientific Research and Advancement. Specialization in structural biochemistry, published author and Nobel laureate. Interview subject, Adam. The time is 11:47 p.m., March the 21st, 2024. Location, personal offices of Cassandra Reynolds, Washington, D.C. Personal notes, italicized. The next chapter will be A Glimmer in the Veins. We will pick that up in a separate session. Thank you for listening. Come back for more.